Chapter 41. I am 15 chapters ahead on my Patreon, check it out if you are interested. Web links eacute.com/emperordragon. Chapter 41. A Name Like Thunder. Lucas's perspective. I sat on the edge of Richard's old bed, the creak of the worn mattress beneath me grounding me just enough to stay still. In my hands, I held the sealed envelope he'd left behind, small, innocuous, but heavy in a way that paper had no right to be. I cradled it like it was something fragile, sacred, volatile. Like it might disappear if I moved wrong. Or worse, detonate with the truth inside it. There was something electric humming just under the surface of my skin, like a static charge building, warning me that once I opened this, everything would change. A strange, wary energy that made my fingers hesitate just inches from the seal. I stopped myself. Something felt off. Faintly magical. Familiar, but not safe. There's a sigil on this, I murmured aloud, eyes narrowing. From across the room, Emily turned. She had been gently combing through some of Richard's old gear. When she heard the edge in my voice, she left whatever she was handling behind and crossed over to me, her curiosity sharpening. Let me see, she said, her tone calm but alert. I handed the envelope to her carefully, as though it might shatter in the transfer. She took it with both hands, like she knew the weight it carried wasn't just physical. Muttering something soft and low in the old tongue, she let her magic flicker through her eyes, faint green light dancing across her irises as she scanned the envelope. After a moment, she exhaled and nodded. You're right. There's a ward on it. It's beautifully done, very subtle. A sigil keyed to a specific password or phrase. If you open it without saying the right word, it burns. Everything inside, gone. I let out a quiet breath. Of course. That was exactly the kind of thing Richard would do. Careful. Precise. Trusting, yes, but never reckless. He protected what mattered, even from me, maybe especially for me. I took the envelope back and stared at the seal again. It shimmered faintly now, like it was waiting for something. I knew what to say. Aster, I whispered. The moment the word passed my lips, the envelope responded. It warmed in my hands, not burning, just alive. I felt the sigil unravel like threads loosening, silk sliding free. No flash. No noise. Just a quiet exhale of magic. A soft permission. I broke the seal and unfolded the envelope. Inside, there was only a single piece of parchment, neatly folded. No long, tearful goodbye. No cryptic riddles or dramatic declarations. Just Richard. Direct. Clear. Clean. Lucas. You've always been more than the world knew what to do with. I spent years looking. Digging through forgotten histories, pulling truth from the margins of books no one reads anymore, stealing whispers from those who'd rather the past stay buried. But I found it. The name they tried to erase. The bloodline they feared enough to eradicate. Yours. You are Astratides. No one can take that from you now. In the suitcase are your emancipation papers, legal documentation, everything you'll need to stand on your own, even if it's a little earlier than I'd hoped. There's also a bit of gold in there. Call it the last lesson in practicality. But above all, remember this. Never forget who you are, not just what you are. You are Lucas. R. When I reached the end of the letter, I realized I hadn't breathed the entire time. My lungs burned a little, like I'd come up from deep underwater. Emily was still beside me, watching carefully, her expression soft with something I couldn't quite name. What does it say? She asked gently. I didn't answer right away. I folded the letter slowly, reverently, as if I were handling something holy. In a way, I was. You remember the old bloodline? I said eventually, my voice low. The lightning werewolves. The ones whose name and existence was wiped from every record, every history book. Emily's eyes widened just a little, and she nodded. Richard found the name, I said. And he gave it to me. Everything I need. My emancipation papers, a new identity. He left it all for me in the suitcase. She placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. What name? I looked up at her, my voice just above a whisper. Lucas Astratides. Her breath left her like a weight had been lifted from her chest. And then, without hesitation, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. The hug was solid, warm, real, like a shelter I hadn't known I needed. She didn't speak right away, didn't need to. The silence between us held everything. Then, still holding me, she murmured, he knew. Even though you never talked about it, he knew. That it bothered you. Not having a name. Not having something that made you feel like the rest of us. She was right. I hadn't admitted it, not even to myself. But it had eaten at me for years, quietly, relentlessly. That ache to belong. To be someone. To have a name that meant something. A truth I could hold onto. I didn't answer her with words. I couldn't. I just nodded, barely, and stayed still in her arms. And then, as if it had served its purpose, the letter in my hand began to curl inward, edges blackening into soft, silent ash. It disintegrated before my eyes, clean, painless. Like the closing of a chapter. Like a signature fading from the page. I let it go. Next, I turned my attention to the suitcase. It was an old, sturdy thing, dull leather and reinforced corners, the kind of container that could hold something valuable without calling attention to itself. I rested my hand on the top and whispered again, Aster. There was a quiet click, followed by a mechanical hiss as the locks released. The lid opened smoothly. Inside, everything was precise. Orderly. A stack of legal documents, my new identity. Clean paperwork, every form stamped and notarized. My name, my birthright, sealed in ink and approval. I recognized Richard's handwriting on the margins, his practiced forgery of my signature already filling half the blanks. Thoughtful. Prepared. Beneath the papers, nestled in a hidden compartment, were 3 thick gold bars. Heavy. Real. Generational wealth packed away like an afterthought. I couldn't help a small, hollow laugh. Of course. Leave it to Richard to squirrel away a fortune and treat it like spare change. I turned each paper over carefully, scanning the seals and crests, every one of them confirming what I had never dared believe. I existed. I belonged. When I was finished, I placed everything back in the suitcase, gently and with purpose. Then I closed it. And though I didn't say it out loud, I heard the name echo inside my chest, deep and thunderous. Lucas Astratides. It rolled through me like a storm, sharp, cleansing, powerful. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt whole. Chapter 42 Smell. Chapter 42 Smell. Lucas's perspective. It was late. Well, not that late, but later than I usually allowed myself. Late for me. The kind of late that made my skin itch slightly with the sense that I was behind on something, even if there was nothing on the schedule. That annoying hum of having slept past your internal alarm, like I'd betrayed some unspoken deal I had with the day. A low groan escaped me as the pale morning light bled through the cracks in the blinds and painted long, dusty lines across the ceiling. My eyes drifted toward the digital clock on the nightstand, 8:03 a.m. Not catastrophic. Not even that unusual by most standards. But it felt wrong. Still, I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, letting my bones pop and creak as I stretched out the stiffness from the night. My shoulders rolled with the kind of tired satisfaction that came from deep, dreamless sleep. The apartment was quiet, that early morning kind of quiet, the hush that comes before the world really remembers to start humming. I let it wrap around me, familiar and unassuming. Richard's apartment. My apartment now. The thought still landed awkwardly in my brain, like trying on a coat that didn't quite fit yet. Technically it was mine, legally and practically, but emotionally. It still felt like I was house sitting for a ghost. I padded barefoot into the living room. The floors were cool underfoot, the air faintly smelling of coffee and dryer sheets. Sure enough, Emily was already awake and exactly where I expected her to be, curled into one end of the couch, wrapped halfway in a blanket that looked like it had seen better days, legs tucked under her like a contented cat. She was watching some brightly lit home renovation show, the kind where everything gets resolved in 40 minutes with a sledgehammer and a little white paint. In her hands was a comically large bowl of cereal, balanced like a sacred offering, spoon halfway to her mouth. She barely looked up when I walked in, but a grin broke out across her face between bites. Morning, sleeping beauty, she said with that usual teasing edge, her words slightly muffled by a mouthful of sugar and nostalgia. 8 a.m. isn't sleeping in, I mumbled, running a hand through my hair. Not for most people. You're not most people, she countered, nonchalantly scooping up another bite of cereal. You're a werewolf. I figured you'd be brooding in some corner of the apartment with glowing eyes or pacing around like a caged animal, not drooling on a pillow under a comforter. I didn't dignify that with an answer. Instead, I wandered into the kitchen, where the scent of already brewed coffee greeted me like an old friend. She'd made a pot, black, strong, exactly how I liked it. I poured myself a mug, savoring the weight of the cup in my hands and the heat curling off the surface. I sat next to her, letting the couch cushion dip beneath me, and sipped in silence. The show continued to drone on, something about shiplap and open-concept kitchens. The quiet between us wasn't awkward. It was the opposite, comforting, familiar, the kind of silence you could stretch out in without worrying it would snap. Emily had been staying in the guest room for a week, since I moved in. She said she wanted to help me settle, and maybe that was part of it. But I wasn't naive. She didn't want to be alone at her cabin. Not yet. Not after everything we'd gone through together. Not after raising me, not after losing Richard. And truth be told, I didn't mind having her around. I kind of liked it. The apartment didn't feel as hollow with her presence filling the corners. It made it feel a little less like a mausoleum and a little more like a home. Eventually, I stretched and stood, intent on making breakfast. I opened the fridge, fully expecting to find the usual staples, eggs, bacon, something worth frying. Instead, I was greeted by a cold, mocking emptiness. A half stick of butter and a lone jar of mustard that looked far too judgmental for something that expired a few days ago. Great, I muttered under my breath. I threw on my jacket and turned toward the door. Emily glanced up, spoon still in midair. Where are you off to? Supermarket, I said, grabbing my keys. We're out of food. Unless you want to eat mustard with butter. Her face lit up with a weird sort of glee. She shot to her feet, blanket falling away. Wait for me, I'm coming with. I haven't been to a supermarket in, God, I think Reagan was still president. You're that old? I asked, dry as sandpaper. I'm Druid old, she said with a smirk. Totally different metric. We piled into Richard's, my, car and pulled out into the slowly waking city. The traffic was light, the sun slanting across the windshield in golden beams. Emily rolled the window down and stuck her head out just enough to let the wind tangle her silver hair. She looked enchanted by every fast food sign and billboard we passed, smiling like she'd stepped into a whole new world. The supermarket was sleek and modern, with those bright lights that make everything look 10% cleaner than it really is. Emily walked beside me in awe, like we'd just landed on Mars. There's self-checkout now, she whispered like it was a state secret. Emily, I said flatly, they've had that since before Twilight was a thing. Oh, hush, she replied, waving me off. Let me be impressed in peace. We made our way through the aisles, me grabbing what we needed, Emily staring in fascination at the frozen food section like it was a museum exhibit. Everything felt normal, mundane, almost boring. And then it wasn't. The shift was instant. 1 second, I was debating between maple and applewood smoked bacon, and the next, my entire body went still. A chill rolled down my spine. My breath caught, and my nostrils flared. The scent hit me, sharp and unmistakable. Not the sterile cold of freezer air or the cloying sweetness of bakery samples. No, this was something different. Something primal. Fear. Panic, raw and biting. The acidic tang of helplessness. Adrenaline, sweat, dread, all rolled into one thick wave that hit the back of my throat. I stood straighter. My eyes scanned the aisles, zeroing in on the source. And then I saw her. A woman, standing near the front of the store. She was clutching a child's toy like it was a lifeline. Her hands trembled, her speech was too fast, too fragmented, and her eyes, wide and wet, darted between two uniformed police officers. Her whole body screamed of alarm. Of pain. Of something terribly wrong. She wasn't just upset. She was terrified. And I could smell it. Every instinct in me sharpened. My senses narrowed. I stepped forward, ready to find out what happened. Chapter 43 Toy. Chapter 43. The Toy. Lucas's perspective. The supermarket pulsed with its usual rhythms, the mechanical beeps of checkout scanners, the rhythmic clatter of shopping carts over worn tile, and the low murmur of countless conversations blending into a single, indistinct drone. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a cold, artificial glow over rows of produce and brightly colored packaging. Normally, this would all fade into the background for me. Today, it vanished entirely. I focused my senses and the scent hit me even harder. Not something physical. Something visceral. Immediate. Overwhelming. Terror. Not the common, twitchy anxiety that people carry in their shoulders, or the vague unease that creeps up behind you in a dark hallway. No, this was something far more primal. It stung my senses like acid, sharp and suffocating. It was raw, undiluted terror, chemical in its intensity. It clung to the air like smoke after a fire, saturating everything nearby with its foul trace. I turned my head sharply. And then I saw her again. That woman, maybe in her mid-30s, standing just inside the store's entrance. Her body was trembling, her chest hitching with sobs as tears carved tracks down her cheeks. In her hand, she clutched something small and garish, pink plastic, a child's toy. Her knuckles were white around it. Two uniformed officers stood nearby, trying to calm her, but their presence only seemed to heighten the storm of emotion swirling off her in waves. Every part of me sharpened, focus slicing through the noise like a blade through silk. I closed my eyes and tilted my head, tuning out everything else. The world quieted. There was the soft crinkle of plastic grocery bags being stuffed. The low, endless hum of refrigeration units in the back. The high-pitched whine of a misfiring fluorescent light near aisle 4, annoying, persistent. And below all that, quieter but clearer now, voices. I came in with her, my daughter, she's 6, the woman sobbed, her voice strangled and desperate. She was right next to me, I swear. 1 second she was there, and then, she was just gone. She clutched the pink toy tighter like it was the only thing anchoring her to reality. One of the officers spoke, his tone practiced and measured. Ma'am, take a breath. What's your daughter's name? See Chloe, she choked out. Her name is Chloe. She's wearing a blue dress, white shoes. She had her toy unicorn with her, the one with the pink horn. I didn't even notice she was gone until I turned around. I thought maybe she just wandered off into another aisle, I didn't. Her voice cracked completely. The rest dissolved into unintelligible sobs. Beside me, Emily shifted, her eyes on me. Lucas, she murmured, sensing the change in my stance. I lifted a hand, subtle but firm. Not now. That was all she needed. She recognized the tone, quiet, focused, with a lethal edge. As we neared the front of the store, the situation was clearly evolving. The woman had been taken to the small security room off to the side. Now she stood there surrounded by officers and store personnel, hands shaking as she pointed to a monitor. There she is. That's her, the mother said, her voice a frantic mix of relief and terror. The officers leaned in toward the screen. Who's the man with her? One of them asked. I don't know, she whispered, nearly breathless. I've never seen him before. Maybe he said something to her, tricked her, my daughter's friendly. She's a sweet girl. She talks to everyone. Her grief was a physical thing. It filled the room, heavy and smothering. I didn't need to see the footage. I didn't need grainy images or still frames to tell me what I already knew. I could hear everything. Once the woman was led outside to calm down, the officers kept talking, quieter now. He's wearing a cap, one muttered. Keeps his head low, face never clear in any of the shots. His car was parked way at the far end of the lot, the other said. No camera coverage back there. Plates weren't visible. Bastard thought of everything. He planned this, the first one growled. He's probably been watching for weeks. Picked the moment she'd be distracted. Knew what to look for. And now we've got nothing. No name, no face, no vehicle. Just a missing kid and a desperate mother. I opened my eyes. They were wrong. I didn't need the footage. I didn't need a plate number or a pixelated face. I just needed the scent. And the trail was still fresh. Emily noticed I was no longer beside her at the register. Lucas. She called again, more urgent this time. But I was already moving. Focused. Tracking. Just outside the security room, the woman stood, hugging the toy unicorn like it was her daughter herself. Her shoulders shook with sobs. Her fingers trembled. She was lost inside her own mind, gripped by guilt and panic and helplessness. I approached slowly. No sudden movements. Just casual enough to pass unnoticed. And then, just the lightest touch. A slight pivot of my shoulder as I walked past. Enough to bump into her gently. The toy slipped from her hand and landed softly on the tile with a dull plastic clatter. Oh, I'm sorry, she gasped, startled. No, I've got it, I said quickly, crouching to retrieve it. I picked up the toy, bright pink, with a little plastic horn, slightly scuffed and worn at the edges. It was still warm from her grip. I held it for a moment longer than necessary, letting the child's scent imprint into my senses. Then I handed it back. She looked up at me, eyes red, swollen, and utterly broken. Thank you, she whispered. I gave her a single nod. And then I turned and walked away, every part of me tuned to the trail. Her daughter had been taken. But I had what I needed. Chapter 44 Rot. Chapter 44. Rot. Lucas's perspective. The sky overhead had faded from the crisp blue of early morning to a dull, oppressive gray, as if a heavy, suffocating blanket of clouds had been draped across the sun. The sunlight was little more than a memory now, its warmth choked out by the thick, unmoving haze. The world felt colder, harsher, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. I could still feel the weight of what I had just learned pressing down on me, settling deep into my bones and refusing to let go. It was a heaviness that made my muscles tense and my skin itch. My claws hadn't even left my hands yet, but I could feel them just beneath the surface, itching to break free. Every nerve in my body was screaming for release, for action, for violence. The urge to shift, to let the wolf take over, was almost overwhelming. But I held it back, telling myself to stay in control. There would be time for that soon enough. Emily and I walked out of the supermarket together, our bags swinging from our hands, the plastic handles digging into our fingers. Neither of us spoke as we crossed the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. The silence between us was thick and uneasy, filled with all the things we weren't saying. It wasn't until we reached the car that had seen better days, that Emily finally broke the silence. While I popped the trunk and began loading the groceries inside, stacking bags of bread and fruit on top of cans and boxes, she leaned against the car and watched me. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant, when she finally spoke. "So, someone took that woman's child?" she asked, her eyes searching my face for answers. She didn't look rich. Was it for ransom? I slammed the trunk shut with more force than I intended, the sound echoing across the empty lot. I could feel my jaw clench, the anger simmering just beneath my skin. Or worse. Emily pressed, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Worse," I said, my voice flat and cold. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. The look on her face told me she understood. Her jaw tightened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Do you have the scent?" she asked, her eyes sharp and focused now. I nodded, pulling my keys from my pocket and tossing them to her. She caught them without hesitation, her movements quick and sure. No questions, no arguments, no wasted time. "I'll text you the address once I find it," I told her, my voice low and urgent. "Call the cops. Send them there." She nodded, already climbing into the driver's seat. "Don't take too long," she said, her tone firm. I didn't answer. I was already moving, already letting the wolf take over as I sprinted away from the car, away from Emily, and toward the scent trail that would lead me to the missing girl. The trail was foul, so much worse than I'd imagined. It reeked of stale sweat and mold, of garbage and unwashed skin. But beneath all that, there was something even more disturbing, the unmistakable stench of rot. It clung to the air like a disease, thick and suffocating, making my stomach churn. It was as if the soul of whoever had taken that little girl had been rotting away for years, leaving nothing behind but decay and corruption. With my speed, it took less than 10 minutes to reach the outskirts of town. The streets here were cracked and broken, lined with rusting trailers and abandoned cars. The houses sagged under their own weight, their paint peeling and their roofs caving in. Weeds choked the yards, and the only sound was the creak of a rusted swing set swaying in the breeze, its seat long since vanished. The scent was strongest here, swirling around a house that looked like it might collapse at any moment. The roof was missing shingles, each one peeling away like an old scab. The front yard was a jungle of weeds, and the windows were clouded with grime. The place radiated neglect and misery. I shifted into my wolf form, feeling my bones stretch and reshape, my senses sharpening to an almost painful degree. My paws were silent on the dirt as I circled the perimeter, searching for any sign of movement. A second-floor window was open, a careless mistake. With a single leap, I soared up and slipped through the opening like a shadow. Inside, the air was even worse. The stench of rot was overwhelming, thick and cloying, making it hard to breathe. My ears twitched as I picked up the faintest sounds, a slow, steady heartbeat, calm, methodical, not the frantic thumping of a terrified child. This was an adult, somewhere downstairs. But beneath that, I caught another scent, the faint, lingering trace of Chloe. I padded through the hallway, each step careful and deliberate, the old wood creaking beneath my weight. I moved down the stairs, every sense alert, every muscle coiled and ready. That's when I saw him. He was sitting in a battered recliner in the living room, his attention focused on the needle and thread in his hands. He was sewing a small dress, pink, with a delicate lace trim. It was far too clean for a place so filthy, and the sight of it made my blood run cold. His scent hit me like a physical blow, sickly, like spoiled meat that didn't know it had died. He was humming softly to himself, a tuneless, unsettling melody that made my skin crawl. And then, beneath that hum, beneath the floorboards, I heard it. A heartbeat. Small. Weak. But alive. The man stood slowly, folding the little dress with a kind of reverence that made my stomach turn. He turned toward the basement door, his movements slow and deliberate. That was his last mistake. With a snarl, I pounced, my claws digging into his chest and pinning him to the filthy carpet. He didn't even have time to scream before my jaws closed around his throat, tearing it open in a spray of blood. His limbs twitched, then went still. I stood over his corpse, my fur bristling. The scent of blood filled the air, mingling with the rot and making it almost unbearable. And then, without hesitation, I turned toward the basement. Chloe was down there. Chapter 45. A Wolf Among Them. Officer Bishop's Perspective. The house loomed at the end of the street, shrouded in shadow and neglect. Even from the curb, it radiated an aura of unease, a sense of abandonment so profound it seemed to warp the air itself. The paint was peeling in long, curling strips, exposing gray, weather-beaten wood beneath. Window panes, streaked with grime, reflected the dying light in a way that made the whole structure look less like a home and more like the memory of a nightmare, a place where bad things had happened and might still be happening, if you dared to look too closely. As I stepped out of the squad car, the air seemed to thicken, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and sharp that made my stomach twist. I reached for my sidearm automatically, the familiar weight of it grounding me as I scanned the yard for movement. My partner, Martinez, was already halfway up the cracked walkway, his posture tense, his hand hovering near his holster. Every line of his body spoke of caution, of anticipation, as if he too could feel the wrongness coiling around this place. The front door yawned open. Not broken, not splintered, not even scratched, just open, as if someone had left in a hurry or, worse, was waiting for us inside. It was the kind of detail that set my nerves on edge. I glanced at Martinez, catching the flicker of anxiety in his eyes. His jaw was clenched tight, and when he spoke, his voice was low and urgent. "You think someone beat us here?" I didn't answer. There was no point in speculating, not when every second mattered. Instead, I signaled to the rest of the team to spread out, 4 units in all. Backup had arrived quickly, the urgency in the dispatcher's voice still echoing in my ears. We moved as one, training and adrenaline guiding our steps as we approached the threshold. Inside, the living room was the first thing we saw, and it stopped us in our tracks. The air was thick with the coppery tang of blood, and the silence was absolute, as if the house itself was holding its breath. There, sprawled on the faded carpet, was the man we'd seen in the surveillance footage. His cap lay discarded on the table beside him, and his body just lying on the ground. But it was his throat that drew the eye, a gaping, ragged wound where flesh had been torn away, as if by the jaws of some ravenous animal. Blood had soaked deep into the fibers of the rug, pooling beneath him in a dark, spreading stain. His eyes, wide and glassy, stared up at the ceiling in a final, silent scream. There were no bullet holes, no signs of a struggle, just the brutal, clinical violence of something fast and merciless. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Jesus," Martinez whispered, carefully stepping around the corpse, his voice barely more than a breath. I forced myself to focus, to keep my hands steady. "Check the rest of the house," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "Go slow. Watch each other's backs." We cleared the ground floor room by room, every shadow a potential threat, every creak of the floorboards setting my nerves on edge. But there was nothing, no movement, no sound except our own careful footsteps. Upstairs was the same, empty bedrooms, dust motes swirling in the shafts of light from the hallway windows. It was as if the house had been abandoned for years, save for the horror in the living room. That left one place, the basement. We regrouped at the door, its surface scarred and splintered with age. My hand shook slightly as I reached for the handle, the wood rough beneath my palm. The hinges groaned as I pushed it open, the sound echoing down the narrow staircase. Martinez took point, his flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the darkness. I followed close behind, the other officers covering our backs. Each step down felt like a descent into another world, a colder, darker place where the rules of reality seemed to bend. The stairs protested under our weight, the sound unnaturally loud in the hush. At the bottom, we paused, senses straining for any sign of movement. Then we saw her. Chloe sat cross-legged on the cracked concrete floor of a small room at the back of the basement. She looked impossibly calm, her face lit by a gentle, almost dreamy smile. Beside her, sprawled with an ease that belied its size, was a wolf. Not just any wolf, a massive, black-furred beast with eyes that glowed a deep, unnatural red in the beam of our flashlights. It watched us with a gaze that was both intelligent and unsettling, its head lifting slowly as we entered. Martinez's voice was barely a whisper, thick with disbelief. "No way. That's not just a wolf, look at the size of it." One of the rookies, Nelson, lost his composure. His hand trembled as he raised his weapon, finger tightening on the trigger. Before any of us could react, the wolf's eyes seemed to flare, catching the light in a way that made my heart stutter. It was just a trick, I told myself, a reflection, nothing more. But Nelson's face drained of color. His knees buckled, and he crumpled to the floor, his gun skittering away into the shadows. The wolf stood, unfolding itself with a grace that was almost regal. It regarded us for a long, silent moment, no growl, no bared teeth, just a deep, unwavering intent in its stare. Then, without a sound, it turned and padded past us, moving with the silent confidence of something that knew it had nothing to fear. It climbed the stairs, its massive form slipping into the darkness above without so much as a backward glance. Bye, doggy. Chloe called after it, her voice bright and cheerful, as if she were waving goodbye to a friend at the park. We stood frozen until the last echo of its footsteps faded and the oppressive weight in the air finally began to lift. Only then did Martinez let out a shaky breath. What the hell was that? I didn't answer. There were no words for what we'd just seen. Instead, I crossed the room to Chloe, kneeling beside her. She looked up at me, her eyes clear and unafraid. Hey there, sweetheart, I said softly. You okay? She nodded, clutching a battered stuffed animal to her chest. The doggy kept me safe. He was nice. I swallowed hard, fighting to keep my voice steady. Yeah, he's a good one. I picked her up gently, wrapping her in my jacket. Let's get you back to your mom. As I carried her up the stairs, her small arms wrapped around my neck, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real story here, the one that mattered, had already left the house. We were just here to pick up the pieces. Chapter 46 Alley. Chapter 46 Shadows in the Alley. A week later. Lucas's perspective. It was precisely 9:07 p.m. when I glanced at my watch, the minute hand ticking forward with a stubborn sense of purpose. Above the city, the sky had deepened into a rich, velvety blue, the kind of blue that almost looked black, its surface punctuated by faint, scattered stars. No one ever bothered to look up at them anymore, too distracted by the city's neon glare, too busy moving from one place to another, eyes glued to their phones or the pavement ahead. The stars watched over us in silence, unnoticed spectators of the night. All around me, the city's heartbeat pulsed in the form of distant sirens and the low, constant hum of traffic. The street lamps lining the pathways of the park buzzed with static electricity, their tired bulbs casting pools of dull amber light onto the cracked concrete. Each lamp created its own little halo, a soft, imperfect circle that failed to push back the darkness beyond its reach. I sat alone on a battered wooden bench, its paint chipped and peeling, the wood beneath rough and splintered. In my hand was a paper cup of coffee, lukewarm, bitter, and entirely unappealing. I took occasional sips more out of habit than desire, using it as a prop, something to occupy my hands while my mind stayed sharp and alert. My gaze drifted across the park, but my attention was fixed on the reflection in the darkened window of a nearby building. Someone was watching me. She was there, just across the path, trying her best to blend in. Her hood was pulled up, shadowing her face, and she kept her head down, eyes glued to her phone as if she was absorbed in some urgent message. But I knew better. I'd noticed her hours ago, trailing me with all the subtlety of a marching band. She thought she was being clever, invisible in the anonymity of the city night. She didn't realize that her anxiety was as obvious to me as a flashing neon sign. I could smell it, sharp, nervous, unmistakable, even from 2 blocks away. She looked to be in her early 30s, maybe a year or two younger. Her eyes were a deep, dark brown, intense and searching, darting up every so often to check if I'd noticed her. Her hair was glossy and black, falling in perfect waves that suggested she'd never had a bad hair day in her life. There was an air of money about her clothes were expensive, her perfume even more so. I caught hints of jasmine and sunscreen, mingled with the crisp, clean scent of new bills. But beneath all that, there was something else, a trace of something familiar, a scent that tugged at the edges of my memory, just out of reach. She wasn't supernatural. I could tell that much. She wasn't a hunter, either. Just an ordinary human, caught up in something she didn't understand, and painfully bad at surveillance. If Richard were still here, he'd be doubled over with laughter, coffee sloshing in his cup as he watched her fumble through her amateur tail job. I kept my eyes on her for another 5 minutes, waiting to see if she'd work up the nerve to approach me, to say something, to make her move. But she just paced back and forth, always trying to look casual, always failing miserably. Her nerves were ridden in every fidget, every sideways glance. Eventually, I decided I'd had enough. I stood up, stretched my arms over my head, and tossed the cold coffee into the nearest trash bin. Without looking back, I made my way to my car, parked under the flickering glow of a street lamp. I didn't bother to check if she was following. I already knew she would. If she wanted to play this game, I'd let her. Let's see how far she's willing to go. I drove across town, letting the city's face change with every passing block. The bright lights and bustling crowds faded behind me, replaced by dimmer neon signs and shuttered storefronts. The buildings grew older, their facades crumbling, graffiti scrawled across every available surface. This was no longer the part of the city you'd find in a tourist brochure. Here, the shadows were thicker, meaner. Here, the night had teeth. Still, she followed. I caught glimpses of her car in my rearview mirror, always keeping a few cars back, always thinking she was clever. I had to give her credit, she was persistent, if nothing else. But I wasn't here for her. Not tonight. I had business to take care of. The Hunter Outpost was a nondescript building, wedged between a pawn shop with barred windows and a barber shop that hadn't seen a customer in weeks. From the outside, it looked like a rundown gun range, half its sign missing, the rest faded and barely legible. You'd never guess what lay beneath the surface: silvered weapons, jars of wolfsbane and other rare herbs, an archive of hunter knowledge hidden under the floorboards. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and gunpowder. I approached the counter and asked for the piece I'd left last week, Richard's old pistol. The one with the hair trigger and the burnished oak grip, worn smooth by years of use. The gunsmith handed it over, freshly cleaned and oiled, the slide moving with buttery smoothness, the sights perfectly aligned. Every part gleamed as if it had just been made. Holding it again felt strange. Like shaking hands with a ghost, familiar, comforting, and a little bit haunting. I nodded my thanks to the grizzled man behind the counter and stepped back out into the night. That's when I heard it. A voice, low and panicked, echoing from the alley behind the range. Quote. Give me the purse. Now. Then her voice. The woman who'd been following me. She sounded terrified, her words trembling with fear. Of course. She hadn't gotten the message. She'd kept following, right into the worst part of town, and now she was paying the price, cornered by someone who sounded desperate and dangerous. Stranger or not, I couldn't just walk away. I wasn't about to let her bleed out in a filthy alley. I left the pistol tucked in my waistband. I didn't need it. Without another thought, I sprinted toward the alley, my boots pounding against the concrete, moving faster than I had in days. The darkness swallowed me whole. Chapter 47 Questions. Chapter 47 Questions in the Dark. Lucas's perspective. The alley was a narrow, forgotten vein running between the city's old brick buildings, lit only by a single, flickering bulb that buzzed like a trapped insect. Rusted fire escapes zigzagged up the walls, their shadows stretching and bending across the damp concrete. Every sound was amplified: the distant wail of a siren, the drip of water from a leaky pipe, the soft shuffling of shoes on grit. The darkness here felt thick, almost tangible, as if it wanted to swallow up anyone foolish enough to wander in. In the midst of that gloom, a man loomed over a woman. He was hunched, shoulders tense, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching even from a distance. In one hand, he gripped a gun, black, ugly, and trembling slightly. With the other, he dug through her purse, his movements frantic and uncoordinated, like a raccoon desperate for scraps in a garbage can. His breathing was ragged, almost animalistic, and every so often he'd glance over his shoulder, as if expecting the shadows themselves to come alive and attack him. Where's the money, huh? He barked, voice hoarse and edged with panic. The veins in his neck stood out like ropes. Where is it? The woman shrank away from him, pressing herself against the cold brick wall. Tears shimmered in her eyes, her hands trembling as she tried to stammer out a response. There was no defiance in her, no hint of deception, just pure, unfiltered terror. The scent of fear hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable. I stepped forward, letting my footsteps echo deliberately in the silence. I kept my posture relaxed, my hands visible, my expression unreadable. What did you expect? I asked, my tone light, almost mocking, as if we were discussing the weather and not a life or death situation. You think she's walking around with wads of cash like she's Tony Montana? It's all digital now. You going to make her wire you the money, or just ask for her PIN and hope for the best? The man whirled around, gun swinging toward me with all the grace of a cornered animal. His eyes flicked between me and the woman, wild and uncertain, as if he couldn't decide who was the greater threat. No. Don't hurt him. The woman cried, her voice cracking with fear. She took a hesitant step toward me, her concern for my safety eclipsing her own terror. I saw it in her eyes, a desperate, protective instinct that made no sense. For a moment, I faltered. Even with her own life on the line, she was worried about me. The realization unsettled me, stirring something deep inside I couldn't quite name. The man kept the gun trained on me, his hand shaking. I reached into my jacket slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a thick clip of cash. Without breaking eye contact, I tossed it to the ground at his feet. There's $1,000 there. Maybe more, I said, my voice steady. Take it. Walk away. No one gets hurt. He hesitated for a split second, then snatched up the cash, thumbing through the bills with greedy, trembling fingers. His eyes glittered with a desperate hunger, as if this money was his last lifeline. You carry this kind of cash? He sneered, suspicion and envy mingling in his tone. Yeah, you're the jackpot. I sighed, the sound heavy with disappointment. You should have walked away. He blinked, confusion flickering across his face. I moved. In a blur, I knocked the gun from his hand. It clattered against the wall, skidding out of reach. My fist connected with his abdomen, not hard enough to break anything, but enough to knock the wind out of him. He doubled over, gasping, then staggered upright and hobbling into the darkness, clutching the cash as if it were a holy relic. The alley was quiet again. The only sounds were the distant hum of the city and the soft, uneven breathing of the woman behind me. I turned to leave, my footsteps echoing in the silence. One step. Two. Then, wait, she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. I stopped, caught off guard by the gentleness in her tone. It wasn't a command, or a plea. It was something softer, more vulnerable, an unspoken question hanging in the air. I glanced over my shoulder, the dim light catching her face. Her eyes were wide, searching, filled with a confusion and longing that mirrored something deep inside me. Who are you, lady? I thought, but the words stayed trapped behind my teeth. We stood there, suspended in the hush of the alley, two strangers bound by a moment that felt heavier than either of us could understand. She didn't speak. She just looked at me, not with fear, or even gratitude, but with something deeper. Something that felt like standing at the edge of a precipice, unsure whether to leap or retreat. Seconds stretched into eternity. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her gaze never leaving mine. It was as if she was searching my face for answers to questions she couldn't bring herself to ask. I turned away, ready to disappear into the night. One step. Another. And then, just as I was about to vanish, her voice, fragile, trembling, yet impossibly piercing, cut through the darkness. You look so much like your father. The words hit me like a physical blow. My body froze, every muscle locked in place. Not out of confusion, but from a sudden, overwhelming clarity. That sense of familiarity I'd felt from the moment I saw her, it all came rushing back in a tidal wave of realization. Her. The woman who gave birth to me. My biological mother. I didn't turn around. I didn't breathe. The night itself seemed to hold its breath with me, waiting for whatever would come next. Chapter 48 Inspoken. Chapter 48. Inspoken. Lucas's perspective. The night air was cool against my skin, brushing past me like a ghost, but it did nothing to ease the fire that churned restlessly inside me. I drew in a deep breath, slow and deliberate, like maybe if I held it long enough, the fire might dissipate. It didn't. Eventually, I turned. And there she was. The woman who had vanished from my life before I ever had a chance to understand what the word mother was supposed to mean. The one who walked away before I could even form memories of her. The one who left me to grow up in shadows. But now she stood right in front of me. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable, even if I'd spent years trying to convince myself otherwise. Her cheekbones were sharp and familiar, the shape of her eyes painfully similar to my own. And no matter how much I wanted to reject the connection, to pretend she was just another stranger, I couldn't. We shared the same blood. Whether I liked it or not. A long, loaded silence settled between us. The dim streetlight overhead flickered, casting a pale glow across her face. I caught the shimmer in her eyes, a glint that might have been unshed tears or just the reflection of guilt. But I didn't react. I didn't blink. I kept my voice level, holding back the storm that threatened to break loose as I finally asked the question that had lived inside me like a splinter buried too deep to remove. Why? She hesitated, her throat moving as she swallowed hard. It looked like the answer physically hurt to speak. Your father and I, her voice cracked. We were just kids. High school sweethearts. We didn't mean for it to happen, but I got pregnant. And when I told him, we made plans, we were going to get married. We were going to figure it out. She paused, her gaze falling to the ground like she couldn't bear to meet my eyes. But then he died. A car crash. No warning, no goodbye. Just gone. She blinked rapidly, like she was trying to hold back tears or time. After that, everything fell apart. I was 17. Scared. Alone. My parents weren't supportive, and I didn't believe I could give you the life you deserved. I thought maybe someone else could. Someone stronger. Someone better. She looked up at me again, and her voice dropped, nearly a whisper. I've regretted it every single day since. I listened. I heard the words. But they weren't enough, not the right ones, not now. I shook my head. Not because I didn't understand her story. But because she didn't understand mine. That's not what I asked, I said, my voice low. Steady. Cold. I'm not asking why you left. I'm asking why you're here now. She froze. And just like that, the weight of those words crashed into her like a wave. I could see it in her face, the way her expression broke open, like I'd slapped her with the truth she wasn't ready for. She stepped forward cautiously, like any sudden movement might push me further away. Lucas, she said, my name barely making it past her lips. Walking away from you was the worst mistake I've ever made. I've spent years trying to find you. After the orphanage, they told me you'd been adopted, but the records were lost. I had no idea where you'd gone, or if I'd ever see you again. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone. She turned the screen toward me. A photo. Emily and me. Sitting on the porch. Just a candid moment, coffee mugs in hand, smiles that weren't forced for once. Peaceful. Almost normal. I saw this online, she said, voice soft but shaking. And after that, I hired a private investigator. He found you. He told me about Richard, about what happened. I'm so sorry. I didn't come here to hurt you. I needed to know if you were okay. I needed to see you. I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding in, eyes drifting away from her face. The pain in her words was real. I could feel that. But pain doesn't undo absence. Regret doesn't erase what was missing. You were just a kid yourself, I said quietly. Caught in a situation way too big for someone that young. I get that. She seemed to draw in hope from that one sentence like it might open a door between us. But I wasn't finished. I looked at her again, truly looked. That doesn't mean you get to show up now. Not after all this time. Not after the years I spent clawing my way through a life that didn't have you in it. You don't get to pick and choose when to be a mother. I grew up without you. I survived without you. And now that I've built something, now that I've managed to hold myself together, now you come back. I met her eyes dead on, unwavering. And as you can see, I'm doing just fine. Then I turned. Walked away. She didn't try to stop me this time, not really. But she caught up enough to press a small business card into my hand before I could leave for good. If you ever need anything, she said softly. Even if it's just to talk, call me. I didn't respond. I didn't look back. I just kept walking. Behind me, I could feel her still standing there, alone, beneath that flickering streetlight. The glow buzzed weakly, uncertain, like it didn't know whether to shine or fade. Just like her. Chapter 49 Unresolved. Chapter 49. Unresolved Ties. Lucas's perspective. I watched from the terrace of the small building as she, my biological mother, got in her car and drove off. It felt like everything should have just ended there. She was gone. The chapter was supposed to close. Yet, my eyes stayed fixed on her taillights until they finally disappeared down the street. I didn't want her in my life. I told her that, and I believed it. But somehow, seeing her leave, driving off into the night, still didn't sit right. Something in me wanted to make sure she was safe. To watch her until the very last trace of her presence faded from view. But that was all I could give her. I wouldn't let her back in. My gaze dropped to the small business card she had handed me. Susan Lockwood was scrawled in elegant script across the front. I read the name twice, once because it was new, and once because it still felt strange to say. Susan Lockwood. I crumpled the card into my fist. She was a stranger. Nothing more. Making sure no one was around, I pushed myself off the building, letting my agility carry me. I landed silently in the dark alley below, a fluid motion that barely disturbed the air. The weight of the card in my pocket felt heavier now. I wasn't sure if it was the card or the thought of what it symbolized. I jogged back to my car, the streets eerily quiet as I drove home. The weight of everything pressed on me, and by the time I pulled into my apartment parking lot, I was ready to collapse into the familiar comfort of my own space. I opened the door, stepping into the apartment to the soft hum of the TV. Emily was there, sitting on the couch, her eyes glued to the screen, but she paused as soon as I entered. I tried to keep my face neutral, but the second her eyes met mine, she knew something was off. She turned off the TV, and in spoken understanding passing between us. Hey, she said softly, standing up, what happened? I just handed her the business card and said, I met my biological mother. Susan Lockwood's name was written neatly across it. Emily took the card and glanced at it, her eyebrows furrowing as she read it. What was she like? She asked cautiously. I let out a breath, leaning against the back. I don't know, I muttered. I didn't bother to ask. My fingers twisted the edge of the couch cushion as I spoke, the bitterness creeping back into my voice. But, something she said is bothering me. She told me that my biological father died in a car crash before I was born. I looked at Emily, frustration building. That shouldn't be possible. Not if he was a werewolf. Emily's expression softened, and she nodded thoughtfully. Odd. But not impossible. Sometimes the werewolf genes skip a few generations. She paused, searching my eyes for answers. Could be something we don't understand yet. I didn't respond right away. She was right. It was just a theory. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Still, I continued, trying to push down the doubt that clouded my thoughts. It doesn't add up. Emily leaned back, her eyes thoughtful. How did she even find you? She asked, eyes narrowing slightly as if searching for an answer herself. I shook my head, my gaze dropping to the floor. She came across that photo of me on your Facebook page. I gave a short, humorless laugh. Then she hired a PI to track me down. I felt the sting of it again, that connection Emily and I had never really discussed, the vulnerability of leaving traces of ourselves online. Emily winced. I never bothered to make my page private. But, then again, you and Richard never left behind any loose ends. I clenched my jaw, the memory of Richard's meticulousness still fresh. He'd always been so careful, so deliberate. His ability to keep secrets, protect us, and make sure nothing could track us down had been his way of keeping us safe. And now it felt like I was standing on a fault line, one that had opened beneath my feet. This isn't a loose end, I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. And I have a feeling this won't go away anytime soon. Emily studied me for a moment, then nodded as if she understood more than I could explain. She didn't say anything, but I could tell she was going through the same realization. This wasn't over. Maybe I wasn't the one in control of my story anymore. The silence between us was thick, charged with something unspoken. Maybe it was because Emily understood, maybe it was because she had already seen too much of the world I lived in, how things can come at us from all directions, unrelenting and without warning. I could feel the weight of the card in my pocket, Susan's name, the sound of her voice repeating those words. Maybe it was the blood I shared with her, the face that mirrored mine. Maybe it was just the way she looked at me with regret in her eyes, something that unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. But I couldn't go back. Not now. I had a life. And this woman, this stranger, had nothing to do with it. I looked at Emily again, silently thanking her for just being here. For knowing when to ask questions and when to let me be. It wasn't over. But I would figure it out. Just like I always had. Chapter 50 Stubborn. Chapter 50. Stubborn as blood. Lucas's perspective. 2 days. That was how long I'd been obsessively sifting through every available scrap of information about the man whose blood runs through my veins, a man I'd never met, but whose absence had shaped my entire life. In those 48 hours, I'd barely slept, my mind caught in a relentless loop, chasing answers I wasn't sure I wanted to find. Name: Michael Smith. Age at time of death: 17. Cause of death: car accident. Severe head trauma. Declared dead at the scene. That was it. No missing person reports filed in the days or weeks before. No whispered rumors in the margins of small-town gossip. No conveniently misplaced police files or suspicious gaps in the official timeline. No hints of anything darker lurking beneath the surface. Just a straightforward, tragic accident, a young life ended far too soon. It was all so ordinary. And somehow, that very ordinariness unsettled me more than anything else could have. I kept expecting to find something out of place, some overlooked detail that would unravel the story I'd been told. I wanted to find a contradiction, a discrepancy, a shadow of the supernatural or the sinister. But every fact lined up, every document confirmed what Susan had already told me. I'd printed out every report, every autopsy summary, every scrap of paperwork, and pored over them until the words blurred together. I read and reread them, searching for hidden meaning, for a clue that would justify my doubts. But there was nothing, not a single thing, that suggested Susan's version of events was anything but the truth. And that, more than anything, bothered me. It wasn't the truth itself that unsettled me. It was the realization that I hadn't believed her. Not fully. Not even when she was telling the truth, plain and simple. I doubted her, second-guessed her motives, looked for lies where there were none. The evidence was right in front of me, but I'd refused to accept it. Why? Why hadn't I believed her, when I knew I would have sensed a lie? I'd spent years honing my ability to read people, analyzing their scent, their heartbeat, the subtle tension in their posture, the flicker of emotion in their eyes. If she'd been lying, I would have known instantly. My instincts had never failed me before. And yet, I'd still doubted her. Maybe it was easier to believe she was hiding something than to confront the possibility that I was the one holding onto old wounds, refusing to let go. Maybe my stubbornness ran deeper than I wanted to admit. I stood in the living room, methodically feeding the last of the papers into the shredder. The machine's steady whir filled the silence, drowning out the noise in my head. The truth was clear now, unambiguous. But it didn't change anything. My past was still my past, untouched, unaltered. The orphanage, the training, Richard and Emily, the pain and the purpose that had shaped me into who I was. When the last strip of paper fell into the bin, I let out a slow breath, feeling neither relief nor closure. Just a quiet, persistent ache. That's when I heard the knock at the door. I didn't need to look to know who it was. I'd sensed her presence the moment her car pulled up outside, the familiar weight of her emotions pressing against the edges of my awareness. Susan Lockwood. I opened the door without a word and stepped aside, letting her enter. There were no greetings, no sharp words or forced politeness. Just a heavy, silent understanding that hung between us. She paused in the doorway, her eyes scanning the apartment as if she were stepping into a museum, one dedicated to a life she'd never been a part of. I moved to the kitchen, filling the kettle and setting out 2 mugs. Tea. Not because I wanted to play host, but because Richard had always insisted that no meaningful conversation could happen without something warm to hold. It was a ritual, a small gesture of civility in a world that often felt anything but civil. By the time I returned to the living room, Susan had settled on the couch, her gaze lingering on the framed photos of Richard, Emily, and me. I set the mugs on the coffee table and took a seat across from her, the space between us charged with things left unsaid. She picked up her mug, blowing gently over the steam before taking a careful sip. Then she looked at me, her dark eyes searching mine, as if hoping to find some trace of herself reflected back. You don't seem surprised, she said quietly. Or angry. You're not even annoyed to see me, after the way you told me to stay out of your life. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. My adopted father, Richard, used to say I was stubborn as a mule. A faint smile tugged at her lips. Sounds like something I would have said. I nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. Yeah, I think I got that part from you. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, voice steady. So let's not drag this out. Just tell me what you want, and we'll get it over with. She set her cup down with deliberate care, her movements precise, almost ceremonial. And then, in a voice so soft and vulnerable it caught me off guard, she spoke. 2 days ago, when I was mugged at gunpoint, she said, her tone matter of fact. It made me realize something. Life's too short to live with regrets. She met my gaze, really met it, not looking through me or past me, but at me. I want what I've wanted for the last 16 years. Her throat worked as she swallowed. I want my son. There was no tremor in her voice, no dramatic plea or tears. Just the quiet, unwavering truth. Honest. Direct. For a long moment, I couldn't find the words to respond. The silence that followed wasn't awkward or uncomfortable, it was heavy, ancient, filled with the weight of everything that had passed between us and everything that still stood in the way. A bridge had burned 16 years ago. Now, she stood at the edge of that river, hoping I'd help rebuild it. But bridges weren't so easily mended. Not with words. Not with tea. Not even with the truth. And that, perhaps, was the hardest truth of all.